Welcome. So, if you've just stepped into a new environmental health and safety role, or maybe you suddenly found yourself holding the bag for facility compliance, yeah, staring down that absolute mountain of federal regulations can be incredibly intimidating. It looks like just endless red tape, right? Well, today, we're going to flip the script. Instead of looking at these hazardous material rules as just another bureaucratic hurdle, we're going to treat them as your facility's good neighbor policy. Because at the end of the day, this is really just about keeping your local community and your first responders safe. I'm going to walk you through a quick visual overview of these rules, minus all the heavy legal jargon, so you can actually feel confident managing your site's responsibilities. Let's dive in.
Okay, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover why chemical safety matters, emergency planning, spill notifications, who to call in a crisis, and we'll wrap up with exemptions. Section 1. Why chemical safety matters. The good neighbor policy. You know, these federal rules basically started because people needed some transparency. Think about it. If a local factory has something potentially dangerous sitting in a massive tank right next to a residential neighborhood, well, the folks living there, and especially the firefighters who might have to run into that factory during a crisis, they have a fundamental right to know exactly what's sitting next door. But that raises a pretty big question. Where do regulators actually draw the line? Because let's be real, pretty much every industrial site uses chemicals. You've got cleaning supplies, fuels, basic solvents. So what turns a regular everyday supply into a serious reportable public threat? Well, the government actually makes this part pretty easy. They keep a master list of what they call an extremely hazardous substance, or an EHS. So this isn't some guessing game, it's a literal specific list of chemicals. And if you bring one of these specific materials onto your property, boom, it flips a massive switch on your regulatory responsibilities. You instantly go from just running a business to being an active participant in local emergency safety planning.
That brings us to Pillar 1, Emergency Planning.
Now, this first pillar is kind of unique because absolutely nothing has to go wrong for these rules to kick in. This whole section is purely about the everyday act of just having dangerous materials sitting perfectly safely in a tank or warehouse. Let's look at two concepts that honestly trip up a lot of new compliance officers. On the left, we've got emergency planning. This is the proactive side. It applies simply because you have dangerous materials on site. So you have to tell the town what you're storing. On the right, we have emergency release. Those are the reactive steps for when something breaks and a chemical escapes. Right now, we're strictly looking at the left side. Just having the stuff triggers the paperwork.
So the really crucial thing here is knowing your timeline. The second your facility brings in enough of an extremely hazardous substance to cross the government's official threshold, a clock starts ticking. You've got exactly 60 days to officially let your local and state emergency planners know that you're now part of their safety planning ecosystem. And hey, 60 days might sound like plenty of time, but in the corporate world, that flies by in a heartbeat.
So how do you actually know if you've crossed that threshold? Regulators use a strict weight limit. If you're dealing with a pure chemical, it's super straightforward. You just weigh it. But what if it's a mixture? Well, you just do a little basic math. Multiply the total weight of the mixture by the percentage of the dangerous chemical inside it. Oh, and here's a pro tip for you. If the hazardous stuff makes up less than 1% of the mixture, you can usually just ignore it. Now, for solids, the rules get a little tighter. If the material is a fine powder or if it's dissolved in a liquid or highly reactive, you have to use a stricter lower limit. Why? Because those forms can spread way faster if an emergency happens.
Moving on to Pillar 2, Spill Notification.
Okay, this is the reactive side of the regulations. This covers the incredibly urgent, stressful stuff a facility manager has to do if one of those dangerous chemicals actually escapes its container. It is literally every compliance officer's worst nightmare. You get the call that a pipe is leaking. But here's the anxiety-inducing question, right? When do a few drops mean you need to hit the panic button and call the government versus just grabbing a mop and handling it internally?
The answer comes down to a concept called the reportable quantity, or RQ. Just like those storage thresholds we just talked about, every dangerous chemical has its own specific assigned RQ. If you spill an amount that equals or goes over this exact weight limit within a rolling 24-hour window, it automatically ceases to be a private internal cleanup. Hitting that limit instantly turns your bad day into a legally reportable public safety incident. No way around it. And if you do hit that reportable quantity, you are legally locked into a very strict two-step timeline. Step 1 is immediate. You've got to get on the phone right away and give verbal notification to the authorities. You literally cannot wait to see how bad it gets. Then, Step 2 happens after the dust settles. As soon as it's practically possible, you have to submit a detailed, written follow-up report that documents the incident,
how you handled it, and any medical advice for the community.
Now, when you make that very first phone call, which, let's be honest, is going to be incredibly high stress, you can't just yell, "We have a leak," and hang up the phone. You need to have some highly specific data ready for the dispatcher. They need the exact chemical name, whether or not it's an extremely hazardous substance, a really solid estimate of how much leaked out, how long it's been leaking, any known health risks, like does it burn the lungs or skin, and what immediate precautions the community needs to take, like do they need to order an evacuation. You've got to have all of that ready.
Section 4. Who do you call? Making the right connections.
So you know you have to make a call. But to who exactly? The environmental compliance world is pretty famous for its endless alphabet soup of acronyms, so let's clear up exactly who is on the other end of the line. The two major players you're going to partner with are the CERC and the LEPC. The CERC is the State Emergency Response Commission. They handle the big picture stuff at the state level. Then you have the LEPC, the Local Emergency Planning Committee. These are your hometown folks, right? Your local fire chief, police, civic leaders. Whether you're sending in your 60-day planning paperwork or calling in a live spill, these are the two organizations you absolutely must notify.
And to make sure communication doesn't break down when things get chaotic, the regulations require a bit of a buddy system. You are mandated to appoint a facility emergency coordinator. This is someone at your plant who knows the operations inside and out. They're legally designated to work hand in hand with the community coordinator, who is the point person for the local government. This whole setup guarantees that if the fire department desperately needs to know what's in your warehouse at 2 a.m., they know exactly who to ask. Also, keep in mind, emergency planning is definitely not a set it and forget it kind of deal. Your facility is a living, breathing operation. So if you make a major change, let's say you add a whole new chemical process or drastically bump up your inventory, you have a strict 30-day deadline to update your local committee. You constantly have to keep the town's safety plans aligned with what's actually happening on your site.
Finally, Section 5, Exemptions and Staying Compliant.
Now, if you've been feeling a little overwhelmed by all these reporting rules, take a breath, because I've got some good news. The regulations are actually pretty pragmatic, and they carve out a few scenarios where you do not need to pull the emergency alarm. First off, if a spill happens, but it stays 100% contained within your property lines and doesn't expose anyone outside the fence, you don't have to trigger a public emergency. They also exempt routine agricultural emissions, and yes, that does include farm animal waste. Plus, if you have an air emission that's already covered by another federal permit, or if your facility has a safe, continuous, and stable release that's already documented as a normal operating procedure, you're generally off the hook for these sudden emergency notifications.
But listen, if those exemptions do not apply, you absolutely, unequivocally must comply. And here is the stark reality of why we do this. Ignoring these reporting requirements isn't just some victimless paperwork violation. If you hide your chemical inventory, you are directly threatening the lives of local firefighters and EMTs. You're essentially forcing them to walk completely blind into a toxic or explosive hazard when they show up to save your facility. Which leaves us with one final and honestly incredibly important question for you to take back to your desk today. Take a really hard look at your site. Is your facility currently a hidden hazard to your town? Or are you operating as a transparent, fully compliant, good neighbor? I highly encourage you to review your chemical inventory this week, double-check those thresholds, and make absolutely sure your community knows exactly how to keep everyone safe. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this makes your compliance journey just a little bit clearer.
If you found this helpful or want to stay updated when this regulation changes, subscribe and support the channel. And if you need the full technical details on this CFR, click the link in the description below. See you next time.